You want to bring us in today, or what do you want?
Yeah, I can. Welcome into the D3 Datacast for Week 8 of the 2024-25 Division III basketball season. Week 8, Matt, a lot of teams, most teams have reached the 8-game mark, which means the D3 Datacast computer is relying solely on in-season data. So we're going to take a look at what the computer is thinking about the national landscape, how some teams are shaking out in terms of their overall ranking among each other, breaking it down into who are the teams that are performing the best, at least in terms of the computer efficiency ratings offensively and defensively. It's going to be time to do a full reset, Matt, because the preseason ratings mean nothing. It's all about the in-season starting today-ish.
It's all about the in-season, baby.
Let's go. Hey, if you're new to the D3 Datacast, we're glad you're here. We're having fun this season. We'll be here all season long. We hope you join us the rest of the way. And if you like what we're doing, consider clicking the subscribe button. We're closing in on a big goal, the 1,000 subscriber mark here on YouTube. And boy, as we're recording this, Matt, fewer than 25 will get us there. Super exciting. And it's episode 98. So we've got this 1,000 subscriber mark, coming down the track at the same time as we're heading towards episode 100. Exciting times in Division III basketball. Exciting times for this here D3 Datacast program.
As you said, we're only 25 away from 1,000. Every week, we know there's 200 to 300 people who watch this that are not subscribed. So just hit the subscribe button below. It's free and it's easy and it helps us out a ton.
All right, as we said, we're going to do a full in-season efficiency ratings review this week. So, Matt, hopefully we do have some new viewers, some people who have found us since this season began. So let's start with just a real quick overview. What are efficiency ratings? Let's set a little bit of a framework here, a basis for understanding for what exactly we're going to be talking about today.
So if you're familiar with the D1 landscape, Ken Pomeroy, kenpom.com, has run efficiency ratings for years, and I've tried to largely recreate these, made them my own a little bit for Division III. First thing to know is they're tempo free. So it's not just about how many points you score and how many points you give up, but how you do that on kind of a per possession basis. So a team like Grinnell or Greenville might score a ton of points, but that doesn't mean they're the best offense because their system is designed to get a lot of possessions and give up a lot of possessions on the other end. I rank teams overall by efficiency margin. That's the difference between points allowed and points scored per 100 possessions, just to put everyone on the same scale though. And I try to adjust it for opponent quality. So if one team's out there playing Randolph-Macon and another one's out there playing Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, those are going to be kind of, the computer's going to know those are different quality of opponents and adjust accordingly. So those are the kind of the three tenets of the efficiency ratings: tempo free, by overall efficiency margin, trying to be adjusted for opponent quality here. And you can find all these all season long at d3datacast.com. I try to update them every single day after games have been played, or in the morning for games that have been played the night before. And hopefully you can enjoy them.
So leading into the season, Matt, you published preseason efficiency ratings based on a couple years of history and a little bit of, bringing everyone towards the mean. And then we referenced already the 8-game mark. What happens is those preseason projections kind of work their way out through the system on a 1/8 basis. So every game during the regular season that gets played pushes out a little bit of that preseason expectation to the point when a team has played 8 games, it is solely based on those games in season, and that preseason baseline has been totally taken away. So that's why we're here. A lot of teams have gotten that to that point or past that point. So we're going to look at what's going on and take a fresh look now that that preseason projection or that preseason baseline has worked its way as water under the bridge.
Yeah, so here on your screen now is just a screenshot from d3datacast.com. This is like the top 20 of the efficiency ratings. If you want to see all 410 teams or whatever, you can go to the site here. But here's just a snippet above. Right out at the top is actually NYU out of the UAA. They are plus 40 in efficiency margin, and they get there by being 125 points scored per 100 possessions and only allowing 85. So the difference there is about 40 points. So they are plus 40 efficiency margin overall. And Zach, that's a huge number. You were looking up some information on kind of what that has meant in a recent history standpoint. So what does plus 40 look like?
Yeah, it was just the 40 stuck out because as we've been really tracking this closely, doing this show over the last few years, I don't remember seeing 40 before, certainly not in an end of season number. So I went back like that 2022 Randolph-Macon National Championship team, which is about as much of a juggernaut as I could think of in the last few years. They finished at a plus 38. So even that team, you think about how great that, fifth year Buzz Anthony, Randolph Macon juggernaut team coming out of COVID, probably would have been working on their second national championship had there been tournament play through COVID. But they came out of that and just were a juggernaut that season. Very impressive in the Final Four. But they finished at a 38. And here we see NYU sitting at plus 40.2. And they've played 8 games, Matt. So this is entirely based on what they have done so far this season. That number just stands out and hopefully put some context to it for people who've been following Division 3 basketball at least the last couple of years to know how that stacks up to a team like that Randolph Macon championship team from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and as you said, we're past 8 games for NYU, which means the computer's only taking into account this season's data. But that doesn't mean the ink's completely dry. It's still only eight
Right.
games, which is a small-ish sample size. So as they play more games, they're gonna have to perform very well to maintain that number. But for NYU, I don't think it's just against a bad schedule that they put these numbers up against. The strength of schedule on the screens against. Their average overall efficiency margin is a plus 4.5. So they've on average played a top 100 opponent overall. So it's not been terrible teams. I think they've beaten teams like Rowan by a big number, Connecticut College they've beaten by a big number. So it's other teams from good conferences and teams that have competed in the top halves of those conferences. So really interesting to see what NYU will do in the new year going into UAA play. There's going to be some tough games there, but they're going to have to win a bunch of those games if they want to maintain even close to that plus 40 mark.
Well, and as we know, in UAA play, you have a lot of opportunities to win marquee headlining wins there, basically on a nightly basis. So we'll know a lot about NYU pretty soon into January as they get into UAA play.
And then just going next on the list, Trinity, Connecticut, plus 35.7. That would also rank really highly on those lists of teams that you talked about recently. Like that's competitive with that Randolph Macon team of yesteryear. So what is Trinity going to do in NESCAC play when things get tough? Now, they're not the same as NYU in that I don't think they've played a very tough schedule at all. So Trinity, Connecticut, like we mentioned, these are adjusted for opponent quality. So in theory, the computer's doing a good job of understanding who Trinity has played and that they've had to beat them by huge margins to get here. I always wonder a little bit, though, is there some kind of compounding effect when an elite team plays a non-elite team? Is it perfect, right? No, it's not perfect. So we'll have to see what Trinity. I'm really interested in seeing what Trinity does against better teams.
But I feel like this is the same dynamic we saw play out with Trinity last year.
Yeah,
Now,
similar.
this year we have the benefit of having seen what they were and what they did as the season played out last year. But, think back to a year ago. Trinity started, not so much on the national radar from a big way. They played. I feel like they had a really front loaded schedule, and they were, quickly out to, I don't know, 7-0, 9-0 record before some teams had played like 5 games. Um, but anyway, we had won a bunch of games. We're beating suspect competition, but by huge margins. And I recall as we were doing the show last year, they were popping up. Maybe kind of like we see, not to jump ahead too much, but Wesleyan here at number 5, beating some suspect competition, but doing it by margins that the computer was really taking note of. And I feel like the computer rankings were ahead of human voters as it came to Trinity last year. And then, of
Yeah.
course, you see the way that the season played out. NESCAC champs make a run to the Final Four. They indeed were legit. But through the early going there, where they were winning games by big margins, but it was like, okay, but what's the level of competition? So that's where we talked previously about maybe the computer does a better job or is more able to contextualize what the margin means over a team that yes they should beat, but there's a difference in that between okay they beat a team they should beat but it was by 10 versus they beat a team they should beat but it was by 30. So that's hard for maybe a human voter who's looking to try to where do I slot them into a top 25. The computer has a way of handling that, and maybe it's right, maybe it's not exactly right. But that's one of the things that is interesting about using something like this as a companion
Yeah.
to maybe something like an opinion poll that's like a top 25.
And I think this year the human voters are not really that skeptical of Trinity. Like you said,
No,
we saw
certainly
them
not.
going to the Final Four last year.
Right.
Last year they were, and probably rightly so. I think if we had not seen Trinity make a strong tournament run and win that quadrant that had teams like John Carroll and Randolph Macon and Calvin, they went through a tough quadrant and they won that and they went to the Final Four. And so I think we understand that there's a strong team there that even though they haven't played anyone yet this year, there's a little bit more alignment in what the humans and the computers are doing.
Right. Well, and because they're once again doing it oftentimes by just, eye popping margins, which is,
Beating Yeshiva
basically
by 41.
the formula they followed last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, back to the UAA, Matt. With Emory here, Emory certainly has been a team that's on the national radar a little bit more than NYU, just because of the schedule they played has been a little bit better than NYU. But here checking in pretty similarly uh, as one of the elite teams here in the early on.
Yeah, we saw Emory at the Great Lakes Invitational. They looked great. They're currently number one on my ballot. No poll this week, so that's why we didn't have a talk about a new ballot. But I think Emory's one of the best teams in the country. But as you can see on the screen, it's not going to be easy for them in conference play. I think NYU is right there. Wash U is also rated in the top 10 by the computers. So there's a bunch of good teams in that conference. Even though I think Emory's one of the very best teams in the whole nation right now in Division Three, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to win that conference. And speaking of Wash U, I'll just call it out. They're a team that's a really good example of this. We're going to go on in this episode and talk about the top 10 offenses and defenses in the country. You don't need to be in any of those lists, those elite lists, to be a really good team. Wash U right now, kind of just outside the top 10 in offense and outside in defense, but they're number 9 overall in the country. Obviously, still quite good in both of those categories. But teams like Wash U and Randolph Macon right behind them, not a top 10 offense, not a top 10 defense, but both top 10 teams right now by the computer, just because they're doing very well in both categories, even if they're not in the very tippy top elite group.
And then Matt, our defending national champion, Trine here with a plus 32.1 adjusted efficiency margin rating. So let's go back to last year where they ended at a plus 22.1. Of course, that's the full season, which included a national championship. It also included a loss to a team like Olivet.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they finished last year. That was ranked 11th overall. Here they're checking in number 4 with a plus 32.1 rating. And, anytime you're seeing a number here that's above 30, you're talking about, one of the top 3, 4, or 5 teams usually on a yearly basis. Trying looking elite so far and, are posting better computer efficiency ratings numbers than they had during their championship season a year ago.
Yeah, just impressive how many teams are plus 30 or more right now. I think we'll have to see if that continues all season long. But as you mentioned, that's kind of been the cutoff for elite status. We've had seasons where no one was plus 30, and right now we have I think 4 teams, so that's looking strong as well. Another conference that's no stranger to top kind of 2025 consideration is the ODAC. We've talked a lot about Hampton-Sydney in recent years. We've talked a lot about Randolph-Macon in recent years, but they're not the leaders in the computer ratings right now in the ODAC, Zach. It's Roanoke. The Maroons are the top team, number 7 overall.
Yeah, certainly no strangers there with Randolph-Macon and Hampton-Sydney, but interesting to see Roanoke, Matt. As we've tracked Roanoke, they've seemed to always be like that next team in the tier whatever that is below, whatever that top group is in the ODAC. I think we've talked about it a lot in our picks. Like there's a group of teams they play a good schedule usually, and they can beat good teams, and it's just their bugaboo has been, whatever that top 2, 3, 4 team group is. They've kind of struggled to break through with wins there. So at least right now, the computer is saying, "Hey, let's play these on a neutral court tomorrow." The computer would like Roanoke.
Yeah, so we'll watch the Maroons, see if they can make a really strong run in that league. I think that league, there's obviously still great teams, but I think it's a little bit more open than it's been the last couple of years, and a team like Roanoke might be ready to seize the moment.
All right, Matt, let's talk about the NESCAC. We've talked in previous episodes that, looking at lists like this, looking at NPI, that it feels like it might be setting up to be another NESCAC year. I want to just go back to Wesleyan. Here's number 5 on this list, the second NESCAC team listed, and I feel like they're in kind of that similar position to what we saw with Trinity last year, where the schedule is suspect, but there's something there the computer really likes. As a top 25 voter, you know, I feel like the top 25 poll was a little bit slow on Trinity, and so far has been a little bit slower than the computer has with Wesleyan. How are you as a top 25 human voter thinking about Wesleyan, especially tracking what your computer is seeing out of Wesleyan?
Yeah, I've had them in my top 25 for a couple of weeks now. I don't have my last ballot in front of me. I don't know exactly where they were, but I've been high on them. I would like to see them get into the teeth of their schedule here coming up. But I think, like Trinity last year, I think I'm excited about what I see. I I feel like the entire NESCAC maybe gets a bad rap out of this for maybe what a few teams do, but I feel like they're always really slow to get into maybe quality competition. I think teams like Tufts, right from the jump, I think they're playing good competition. I think we've seen Middlebury play good competition a lot of years. I think some of the other teams take it easy for a month or two, and so you're never really quite sure what you're getting. But at the end of the year, the conference is always really good. So I'm anticipating Wesleyan being really strong, even though we haven't seen them play, really solidly above average competition yet.
And then just to round out the NESCAC discussion as it pertains to the top 20 here, Matt, Tufts at number 8, and then Amherst at number 19, still sticking around there. A team we talked about when we took, kind of an early look at how the computer ratings were progressing. Some of the biggest movers from the preseason ratings, and Amherst was on that list. And I think we agreed that we weren't quite sure exactly what it was the computer was seeing, but it still seems to be seeing something similar here with Amherst at number 19.
Yeah, and I'm very skeptical of Amherst. I don't think they've done all their work by destroying really bad teams, and I think when they've played more reasonable competition, it hasn't been there. They're a team that I look at number 19 at 7-3, and I'm really not sure what exactly it is that the computer is seeing that they're completely in love with. I expect Amherst's rating to fall as they get into their schedules. They play better teams. Maybe they'll surprise me. Maybe I'll be wrong. I've been wrong on this show before. If you follow people on social media, they don't like all of my takes about other conferences like maybe the CCIW. But right now, I'm going to sell Amherst. I'm going to say the computer is way too high on them.
And then Matt, I don't know if you have any feelings on this. I was looking at this, and we talked about in the intro how these are tempo free, so you can play fast and score a bunch of points. That doesn't necessarily mean you have an efficient offense. You could play fast and give up a bunch of points, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have a bad defense on a per possession basis. But as I'm looking at that adjusted tempo column, it seems to me that a lot of the teams in this top 20 list are in the bottom 50% in terms of their tempo, with only Emory and I believe Keene State as the only in the teams that play in the top 100 in terms of their pace. I don't think that there's necessarily anything to that. I wonder if, as you've tracked efficiency ratings over the years, if you have any feelings about that. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of different ways to get it done, and it's all about being really good at what you do. But I thought that was just interesting. As I was looking at that, it just seems that it strikes me a lot of those teams listed here in the top 20 are in the bottom 50% when it comes to tempo.
Yeah, I've thought that in the past, that the slower teams are better. When I've graphed it out overall nationally, it doesn't seem like there's actually any correlation between tempo and team quality. You can get it done on either side. But I think what's interesting about tempo is there's usually a few outliers, mostly on the fast side of things, that really look to push it. Other than that, teams are really within a few possessions. Like 200 teams are probably within 3 or 4 possessions a game as far as what tempo they like to play. Like 74 is about the average. Most teams are playing somewhere in the 70s, right, or high 60s. So there's not a huge difference. And I think kind of eye test, you wouldn't really notice much of a difference in tempos in a lot of those games. So I really don't think there is much of a correlation between fast teams and slow teams. But yeah, you get teams from the WIAC, you get teams from the NESCAC. They're not usually looking to run up and down the court. They're going to put you in half-court offense. They're going to lock you down in half-court defense, and you're going to play a little bit slower than average game. But I don't think there's really much correlation.
That's how teams are looking on the whole. Let's dive in, Matt, a little more granularly to take a look at who's getting it done on the offensive end first. The top 10 offensive efficiency ratings leaders here as we're getting into late December, with most teams past that 8 game mark, looking at what they've done entirely this season.
Yeah, NYU right off the top. They're number one in offense. We talked about them. Their plus 40 overall rating is huge. They're 125 or 125 points scored on average per 100 possessions. That's the top offense in the country. We weren't sure what NYU was going to be without Spencer Friedman this year. Looks like offensively they're just fine. They're getting on just fine. They're one of the teams also, we're going to give you a little preview. Look to the right. Their defensive rating, right? They're also in the top 10. They're good all the way across the board. That's how you get to be number one with that huge number. NYU number one. Number two, right behind them, Hampton-Sydney. They've been no stranger to kind of top rankings. They were in the national championship game last season. So having a good offense from them is not a surprise. Their offense is led by guard Adam Brazel. He's been around. He's a fifth-year player, scores a ton of points. You kind of expect to see teams like that with players like that scoring offensively big numbers. And then the defending national champs, Trine at number 3, 121 points scored per 100 possessions, adjusted for opponent quality. Trine looks really good. They've been really good offensively as well this season.
And Hampton-Sydney, national runner-up, they are improved in this offensive category here. It's the defense that's been keeping them so far from meeting where they were a year ago. Similar story with Trine, who is also improved on in the offensive list there. They were outside the top 30 a year ago at 112, here with the number 3 offense at 121.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the number 4 team here, Keene State, is another team that's been high in top 25 ratings, computer polls the last several seasons. Not really a surprise to see them in the top category. Keene State's a team we expect to see. But I will call it my first surprise at number 5, Heidelberg. Heidelberg is a team, they've been good out of the OAC the last several seasons. They've been kind of in and out of regional rankings in Region 7 in that old system. They're a team that our team, Calvin, played this year. And I will admit, I did not really realize that their offense was getting these elite type numbers this year. So Heidelberg's offense looks great. They have a disparity with their defense. Their defense has struggled a little bit, but I'm interested to see what their offense can do in the OAC. If they can make a bunch of noise, can they be a little bit of a contender there in an OAC that now looks like it's a wide open race?
Yeah, that's certainly looking like a wide open race there, Matt. Okay, we talked about Roanoke, and they're maybe the surprise computer leader. I'm not going to call them an ODAC favorite, but I will call them here the computer ODAC leader. And good numbers across the board, but here making the list is top 10 offense here at number 6.
Number 7 is a team we talked about a bunch on the previous conversation here, Trinity, Connecticut. They're the number 2 team overall by the computer. They have the number 7 offense. They look really good. We would like to see that competition quality go up a little bit before we're completely convinced that their rating is this strong, but I think we're convinced that they're a good team overall. And then the number 8 offense, again, not a surprise. That's Guilford. But here we also see a huge disparity offense to defense. Offense is still elite. It was last year in their Final Four run. The defense really fell off. Last year, they were top 10 in both categories. This year, it looks like they've so far maintained that offense, but have to find where that defense is going to come from if they're going to climb back up the ODAC rankings.
Yeah, a huge difference there for Guilford. That's pretty surprising to see. Matt, another team that is, not quite the disparity you see with Guilford there, but TCNJ, a top 10 offense and outside the top 100 defensively, but they're getting it done. And then Platteville, Matt, brings back a very similar team. Not surprisingly, their offense looks very similar to where it finished a year ago at 118.9 here, 117.7. Right in striking range, exactly what Platteville was a year ago offensively.
Yeah, it is amazing. They bring back a lot of key players from that team that was in the Elite Eight last year, and their overall offensive and defensive ratings are very similar overall to where they were last year. So they're a team, I think maybe we were looking for a step up to them. Like I thought they were maybe a preseason number 1 conversation type team. They haven't exactly been that this year, but they've still been very good, kind of like a top 10 overall team. So Platteville's been great. I want to jump up one spot to TCNJ at number 9, just to kind of call out the NJAC-ness of it. I'm never surprised to see an NJAC team. I think of them as like an offensive league, and to see an NJAC in the top 10 offenses is not very surprising. We'll see it a little bit on the next slide too when we talk about defenses, but I sometimes just kind of put whole conferences into buckets as like offensive conference and defensive conference. And I think of NJAC as they're going to score points. They're going to get up and down the court. They're going to play a little bit fast. We talked about tempo. That's what I think of the NJAC. And it's just funny when reality lines up with what you think in your head.
Mm-hmm. Certainly how I think of like a Rowan team, right?
Yeah.
That's been, created some interesting tournament matchups in recent years. All right, so let's move on to the next list, Matt. The top 10 defensive efficiency ratings, and starting with a team we've already talked about here, Matt. Here's Amherst. This is what the computer particularly loves about Amherst, and it's that adjusted defensive efficiency margin number at 80.9.
Yeah, and maybe this is where some of my skepticism comes into play. Maybe they're putting up low numbers, or they're offensively, they're just kind of maybe so-so, a tick above average, but defensively, they look like they're really locking down. We'll see if that can continue. Sometimes I think of these top 10 offense and defensive lists and think it might be boring, right? Like it's just going to be the same teams on both lists because the teams that are good at basketball are good at basketball. And sometimes that's true. We saw NYU at the top of both lists. But here we see kind of some really big differences right at the top too. Amherst, a number 161 offense, but their defense is number 1. Then right behind them, St. Lawrence out of the Liberty League. They're the number 389 offense, but their defense is number 2. Like they can't score the ball, but you can't score the ball against them. That's why we talked about their game against, I think it was Oswego State earlier this year. And that game was something like 43-42 or something, and that was the final score. And that's just gonna be St. Lawrence. And we talked about like conferences overall and what we kind of put them in a bucket. Liberty League is much my go-to defensive conference. They're kind of more of like a mid-tier league overall, a tick above average, like number 16 conference right now, but they're the number 3 defensive conference. I feel like the Liberty League as a whole is just going to play tons of defense, and I think St. Lawrence right now is just very emblematic of what the Liberty League is as a whole.
And let's talk conferences, Matt, because we got a top 10 list here, but we got 5 names from one conference, and that's the NESCAC. We talked about Amherst, but the NESCAC, I guess you'd have to put in that defensive category. Trinity, here's the 3rd team listed. We got Bowdoin, Wesleyan, and Hamilton. Hamilton is another one of those teams we talked about as one of the, we talked about them in the episode we did about some of the best teams that had not yet received any top 25 votes. And here's what's putting them on the map. It's their defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to go right back to what I said about the NESCAC earlier. They have the perception or the reputation of playing soft non-conference schedules. I think a bunch of the teams on this list from the NESCAC are in that group. I don't know if there's something about playing, if you're an elite team and you play bad teams, if you can look better defensively just by showing up. I don't know. Again, the computer is supposed to make adjustments here. So I remain skeptical, but maybe that's a me problem and not necessarily a NESCAC problem. I'm interested to see how this conference finishes defensively because right now, as you said, 5 teams in the top 10, the NESCAC's defensive ratings are off the charts.
And the pair of elite UAA teams, Matt, and Emory and NYU show up here. We talked about, NYU being on the top 10 offensive list and defensive list here. Emory, I think of Emory as more of an offensive team, certainly some capable scorers. You can see the highlight dunks. But here they're rating out better defensively than they are actually offensively so far this season.
Yeah, and it's still very good offensively at number 20.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been Emory's defense actually that has maybe led the charge a little bit more, even though, as you said, they're kind of a highlight reel team, or they can be a highlight reel team. It's not, and again, I think we say this about like some player like Jair Knight all the time. The dunks and the athleticism are sometimes what jump off the page at you, but then if you watch him, a really good and skilled player overall. It's just he's not just a one trick, right? He does everything,
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of the Emory team as well.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. Matt, let's talk about Stevens Point. It's been a resurgent season for Stevens Point. I think we're in for a resurgent season from a WIAC conference as a whole that was Platteville and kind of nobody else a year ago. We've already talked so far this season about lacrosse at various times being impressive. We think Oshkosh has a lot of potential. Stevens Point now they've given the defending champ Trine their first loss. Got another really good win over Christopher Newport. Played a really great game against Randolph Macon that they came up just short for their first loss. But the Pointers here, really getting it done as a top 10 defense here so far.
Yeah, and that's what goes in my head when I think of a strong WIAC team. Is I think of kind of big hulking Wisconsin boys playing defense and locking you down. And Stevens Point is putting up the defensive ratings right now. And I'm otherwise surprised at how East Coast heavy this list is. But then you get a WIAC in here with Stevens Point, the number 7 defense, even though they have a number 105 offense. But that's been their resurgence this year. It's defensive led, and I think they're going to be a player in the WIAC race. And right now it looks like because they're going to lock you down on defense.
So interesting to see some of these trends. Do they continue as the season marches on? As you said, it's important to reach that 8-game mark. Although Matt, with St. Lawrence, they're at 7. So basically 12.5% of their computer profile at this point is based still on that preseason projection. We talked about Keene State. They're another team that's still at 7 games. Everyone else we've talked about has played at least 8 games. So that's fully in season data. Interesting to see some of these early trends. What are they? Which ones reverse, maybe change, some teams that fall back, and which ones carry through. Certainly a year ago, Trinity was one of those that was an early standout there in the computer, and as the season played out, proved that the computer was ahead of the curve. But that's not going to always be the case. And it doesn't make a team any better or worse, but of course there are different ways that teams can play. So we thought that would be interesting just to take a look at the 5 fastest and 5 slowest teams in terms of their adjusted tempo. And like you said, Matt, for teams in probably the middle 300 or something, you watch a game and you may not necessarily notice much difference in terms of pace. But probably if you're watching one of these 10 teams, the 5 fastest or 5 slowest, you may notice a bit more of a difference.
Yeah, and as I said, the average is usually about 74 possessions per game. But we know at teams like Greenville and Grinnell, I think a lot of D3 fans will name them right away as some of the faster teams. They play like the system type offense where they're really trying to push the ball, trap on defense, get steals, get a quick 3-point shot, and almost don't care if you give up a layup on the other end because you just want to get the ball back. Greenville plays at almost 104 possessions per game, so about 30 possessions more. That's getting close to like an additional 50% possessions per game, whatever that is, extra 40% or so. Greenville plays really fast. Grinnell's second. They're playing at almost 100 possessions a game. Then it starts to tick slower. Howard Payne, I've not been aware of their style this season or last season, I'll admit. They're about 91 possessions a game. Pitt Bradford, who's one of the undefeated teams, they're 7-0, 88 possessions a game. And then the 5th fastest right now is University of New England. They're playing at about 84 possessions a game. So it's really those top teams, because once you get down to 5th, you're only at kind of plus 10 possessions per game as far as a little bit faster. And I think that's starting to, you probably notice that they play quicker or they're trying to get up and down the court, but it's looking like normal basketball. This is not a system type team. I don't think that you would play at 84. It's just probably a team that likes to play with pace. Maybe they're still trapping some or even primarily. I won't admit to knowing a lot of University of New England's playbook right now, but you'll probably notice them playing with pace, but it's not going to be system like. And then on the slow end, you're probably still closer to within that like minus 10 possessions games. It's McDaniel at about 62, Greensboro at the same number actually. Milliken's playing at about 65 possessions a game. Suffolk's playing at about 65, and Penn State Behrend is playing at about 65 possessions a game. So yeah, these teams will probably be slow. They're probably playing a deliberate half-court offense. They're probably not pressuring you or playing full-court press, sinking into a half-court defense. And happy to play that way. But as you can see from records, since you talked about that earlier, you could see there's not really like a huge difference. Grinnell's 9-2, Pitt Bradford 7-0, but otherwise those teams are kind of 500-y. And the slow teams, there's kind of some 500 records. Greensboro is only 1-8, but otherwise these teams are fine. So it's not like there's just an immediate like all the fast teams are bad or good, and all the slow teams are one way or the other. Here, it's just kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say Howard Payne is up from a year ago, Matt. They were, still one of the faster teams, but at like an 80.4
Okay.
last year. So to go to 91, they must be
Yeah.
doing something a little different. I don't know if we have a viewer who's more intimately aware of the offensive system or philosophy going on at the Howard Payne program. Let us know. But that they were already a top 10 pace team last year, but to go from 80 to 91 seems significant.
Before we move on from like top offenses and defenses and things like that, just a couple of points of interest that I noted here. We mentioned on the offensive page, Guilford has still kind of an elite offense, but a defense that has slipped quite a bit. We saw on the defensive page, St. Lawrence has a really good defense but an offense that's not in range. Case Western Reserve, I think, has one of the big disparities again this year. The last couple of seasons, they were an elite Division III team. This year, they've struggled a little bit more. They're 4-5 on the season, so more 500-y. They still have the number 38 offense in the country, so they're still playing offensively really well. But defensively, they're 352. So the other end of the spectrum, they didn't defend great last year, and they're a step back from that this year. So Case Western Reserve, they're going to score a bunch of points on you, but they're going to let a bunch of points in as well. And then, Zach, our team, Calvin, obviously has not had Jalen Overway this year, tore his ACL last year in the tournament. So when you're missing an All-American center that was first-team All-America, the defense has been pretty much the same for Calvin, or at least in range. They're number 23 right now in defense. They were number 15 last year. But the offense number has taken a step back. They're number 139 this year, whereas they were number 33 last year. So what does an All-American center do for you? Gives you about plus 100 points in offensive rankings, and that's been the big difference. I was just interested to see defensively they're pretty similar to what they were last year, at least overall. Maybe not exactly doing the same things, but overall rating they're defensively about the same. But offense haven't been able to get those points. It's one thing when you can get an easy layup. It's another thing when you have to work the ball around a million times to try to get a shot off.
All right, as you mentioned, Matt, those are posted and updated daily at d3datacast.com. You can look through the full list. Every team in Division III, both men's and women's, look to see the ratings, see the rankings for any team that you may be interested in if we didn't talk about them today.
All right, let's review our pick slate from last week, Zach. First pick was St. John's versus Marymount. We both picked St. John's. They were 4.5-point favorites, and they won that game by 16, so we both get a point there. The next pick was Stevens Point versus Christopher Newport. You picked Newport to cover a 3.5-point spread, and they did. Stevens Point won that game by 2, but Newport covered, and you get that point. Salisbury was 6.5-point underdogs at York, Pennsylvania. This ended up being a great game. It was an overtime game, but it was one that Salisbury won. We both picked them, and we both get the point. Wisconsin Lutheran went down to Texas. They were 3-point favorites on the road, and they actually won that game by 9, Zach, so I get the point with Wisconsin Lutheran there. And our D3 Datacast game of the week was Washington U. They were 3.5-point favorites on the road at Illinois Wesleyan. We took the home dogs, and they won it outright in a big way. 84-68 winners. Illinois Wesleyan was victorious, and so were we on that game, Zach. So here's a recap of where things stand. Both of us desperately needed a good week, and we got one, 4-1. So you pull to 13-21-1 overall, and I pull even at 17-17-1. So I still have about a 1-week advantage over you, Zach. So let's go to this week's picks.
Well, I think in practice, it's far more than 1 week. I'm just chasing respectability before I can worry about chasing you down.
So here's the game. As always, if you in TV land out there would like to play along, post your comments below in the comments or on social media at D3 Datacast. We'd like to see your picks as well. And keep a running tally of your score and see if you can beat us, because you probably can. So the first game is Redlands versus Hardin Simmons. It's Redlands that is 8.5-point favorites. Zach, who do you like?
I have gotten burned picking against Hardin Simmons earlier this year, so I'm going to go with them on the 8.5. That feels big. Give me Hardin Simmons.
Yeah, for me, Zach, it feels big too. I think Hardin Simmons has been playing better as of late. I know Redland things can get out of hand against Redlands in a hurry, and they can put up big numbers. But I think Hardin Simmons can stay within the 8.5 there at the very least. The second game is Bethel versus Augustana. When we run that through our computer, it picks Augustana to be 6-point favorites. This is at Augustana. Zach, what is your pick here?
I'm going to go with Augustana at home here, Matt. I feel like there's a second tier of the CCIW that is improved over a year ago, and I think that includes Augustana. Give me Augie.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to go a step further. And I'm going to say Augustana is not far off from pushing into that top tier. I don't think they're there yet. I think that's still maybe like Carthage and Illinois Wesleyan, or maybe it's just Illinois Wesleyan, or maybe it's none of those teams. But I think Augustana is at least getting close there, and I think that they can cover this, even though it's 6 points at home. Next game, Mount Union 1-point underdogs versus Ramapo. I believe this is at the D3Hoops.com Classic in Las Vegas, Zach. 1-point margin here. What's your pick?
I'm not always sure what to make of Mount Union. I was a little worried about the way they looked in the opener against Yeshiva. I think they've righted the ship a little bit. Man, I could be setting myself to get burned here, but give me the Purple Raiders.
I am going to pick Ramapo in this one, and here's why. They are no strangers to the D3Hoops.com Classic experience. You're a team that's going to have to fly across the country. You're going to go to Vegas. You're going to have to play basketball games against other good teams from good conferences. I think Ramapo is a program that's been there, done that, and I'm going to pick them to cover the 1-point spread here.
Okay.
Our fourth game is Mary Washington versus Gettysburg, but it's actually Mary Washington who the computers favor here by 5.5. I made you recheck this computer line, but this is accurate. What do you think?
It is. Mary Washington's been one of those computer darlings, Matt, and so I don't know if that makes it smart to try to pick against that or dumb to pick against that, but I think, it's Gettysburg's a really good team, and to be getting 5.5 here feels like stealing. So give me the points and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you as well and pick a Gettysburg here, because I think if there's one thing Mary Washington do is they can lose a close game to another really good team. But they're the favorites here, Zach. So they have to win this, and not only win it, but win it by more than 5.5 points. Right. So for that, if it was pick Mary Washington to lose a close game, I think I'd be happy with that. But they're going to have to win against a really good team and win by a pretty good number. So I'm going to go with Gettysburg on that one. And the game we've picked as the D3 Datacast game of the week is Keene State against UW Oshkosh. This is a 9.5-point line, Zach, in favor of Keene State. It's a big number. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think that's too big of a number for or even a really good team to be playing a road game against another good team. It's a true road game. For Keene State, they're going out to Oshkosh. 9.5, man. Give me the Titans here.
Now, we did just see Oshkosh lose to St. Norbert by double digits. We did. So does that give you any pause here?
I mean, I don't think so. The numbers.
It's just really big.
The number's too big.
Right.
I mean, if we were talking 3.5, I'd probably be flipping a coin. But 9.5.
Keene State could win this game by 7 points, and we say, oh, it was a win that Keene State won as expected, and yet Oshkosh still covers comfortably on that game.
Correct.
So I think that's fair. I think we're gonna go 4 in the same direction, 1 opposite. It's all gonna come down to Mount Union Ramapo. I'm gonna pick Oshkosh with you as well, and see how this game goes. See how this week goes.
Hopefully it goes like last week, not like every other week so far this season.
Yeah. All right, Zach, you got a mailbag for us?
Yes, we do, from Ryan Wansing here, Matt. There's kind of a grab bag. Let's start here. National Player of the Year picks. Any names jumping out to you here in the early going?
I mean,
it's so hard with over 400 teams and trying to.
We're still
there's impressive performances all over the place.
I'm gonna stick to a guy we saw live and in person, Jair Knight. Just seems like what he was able to do at the Great Lakes Invitational. Feels like every time Calvin pulled close to Emory in that first Friday night game, it was someone on Emory and probably Jair Knight that was hitting a 3-pointer. He's on a highlight reel every week on D3 Dunks. It seems like he's a great player. He's going to be a player that's on the top of my head all season long. So I will say Jair Knight from Emory is a candidate for National Player of the Year.
Yep. And I'll just throw Logan Pearson's name in there. I think he entered into the season probably as, like a watch list kind of guy expected to be in that mix. And I don't think he's disappointed. Again, another one that we're probably shaped by having seen in person already this season. But he was no stranger to that kind of consideration. I think he probably would have been on everyone's short list heading into the season.
Lots of other good
Okay,
players out there, but we're still in the part of the
sure.
year where we're still like gathering names, right?
Yeah.
And which players pop up night out, night in and night out.
And we're going to find out, the games as we're talking about, making runs towards conferences and conference tournaments, those performances that come up big in big games will carry a lot of weight. So looking forward to seeing more great performances that vault some more names into consideration. All right, Matt, I think I'm gonna not really partake in this one. Thoughts on NPI? I think I'm withholding judgment for a while. Do you have any early thoughts as you're seeing
Yeah, we'll
any of the
watch
early
it as it
numbers?
goes. I think it'll be a fair system for basketball. I think there was reasonable questions about football. I think it ended out okay there. For what it was, I think it was okay. I think it'll be pretty good for basketball. I think it'll give us about what we expect, about what we're used to. I don't think it'll give us anything too crazy. We'll have to see, but I think it'll be fine. But we'll have to watch and see.
Yep, fair. Okay, who can go undefeated? Matt, this is one I was looking into a little bit. I want to say that no one will go undefeated. I think it's just so
Yeah,
difficult to play as many games as is required during a basketball season, and for there to be so many good teams out there. I mean, you've got to be on your game, even as a
hmm
favorite. Even if you're favored in every game, you've got to be on your game every night to go undefeated. I think it's so hard. I don't think anyone will do it. However, for the sake of having a little fun here, the two names that immediately jumped out to me, Matt, are Whitworth and Worcester, just because I think they've really separated themselves as sort of the class of their conferences and are likely to be no worse than maybe like like a 50-50 pick in any game during conference play. So I think that certainly gives them the opportunity. Again, I'll say that I don't think that as we're heading into bracket reveal that we'll be looking at any undefeated teams. We've talked a lot this episode and in the previous weeks about NYU and Emory. Both are still undefeated.
no,
Listen, no one's going
no,
undefeated in UAA
no.
play. Okay, I don't care what it is, how good you are. I don't care if you are a plus 40 NYU. You're not going to go undefeated in the UAA. So we'll just stop that. And I was gonna write off Trinity and some of these other like power conference teams. You playing in the NESCAC. There's too many good teams. You can't expect that they will go undefeated. But Matt, I gotta say, the schedule for Trinity really, I think, sets up favorably that maybe it gives them a shot. You look at what you figure to be their toughest NESCAC games are this season. They've got Middlebury, home game, Williams, home game, Wesleyan, home game, Tufts, home
Wow.
game, right?
Yeah.
To have all four of those be home games, you figure, and with no double round robin,
Yeah.
there's no road game. You figure even the best teams in really good conferences, hey, you go on a road trip to whatever other good team in your conference, yeah, you're probably going to take a loss or two somewhere along the way. The NESCAC, it's a single round robin. Trinity's got all four of those games at home. Man, that's setting up quite an opportunity for them.
Yeah, I very well said. I think those teams are teams that came to my mind, and I think Trinity, yeah, sneaky NESCAC schedule that could break their way. Maybe one other team I would throw out there. Nope, actually they've already taken a loss. I was going to say Keene State, but they already lost to Tufts. If they could get through their Wisconsin trip, they could maybe win the rest. They still have a tough schedule, but they're a team that plays tough games in the non-conference. And yes, forgot that was a 4-point loss against Tufts already. So Keene State will not go undefeated. Let's
You
leave
heard
it.
it here
Let's leave it at
second.
those. Yeah, yeah.
All right, then one more. How do you evaluate a win over a non D3 school like Worcester just got a win over Hawaii Pacific? Just a little general explanation here in terms of NPI. So when it comes to selection for at-large bids to the national tournament or seeding within the national tournament, it doesn't enter into the equation at all. NPI works only on Division three versus Division three contests. And then all these efficiency ratings that we've talked about here with the D3 Datacast computer that only considers games played among D3 opponents. So just in terms of any D3 against a non D3 opponent, the D3 Datacast computer will not consider those games as part of the efficiency ratings. Those games will not mean anything in terms of the national picture regarding NPI. But Matt, how do you view this
Yeah.
kind of situation as a top 25 voter? A very subjective thing. It could help shape a way you think about a team. Of course, I think a couple years ago, it was December, and Mary Hardin Baylor took down Texas State, and I know there was a lot of talk about, well, what do you do with that as a voter, because you saw them do it, but even in that case, it was an exhibition, I believe, for Mary Hardin Baylor. So. How does that influence or not influence you as a top 25 voter who may have some latitude?
Yeah, it does. Like I try to look into the games. It depends on what the game is, right? So if you're playing some NAIA or NCCAA team that you're supposed to beat by 20 and you beat them by 20 or 30, like I don't really care about that at all too much. I don't really evaluate that type of a game. If you're playing a good NAIA or a team that I'm aware of as a good NAIA or a D2, and you win that game or you're competitive in that game, I will try to contextualize that. I think the best tool for me is the Massey ratings, because Massey will put that in context with D3. So just looking at Hawaii Pacific in a specific way, they would be like the number 12 or 13 Division 3 team. So kind of they would be like a good top 25 type Division 3 team. So I think for that standpoint, for Worcester, it is a good win, and I will try to judge them as such. But when push comes to shove, I will tend to look more at their Division 3 results and weigh more on that. If they end up taking 2, 3, 4, 5 D3 losses down the road, I don't think they will, but if they did, I would judge that more on those results and their whole Division 3 schedule than just, well, they beat this D2 team, if that makes sense at all. So I will put that in context, especially right now in around the time that they win that game and they're still undefeated, and that's a good win that goes in there as a mix. So I will try to keep that in the same mind of maybe where they would rank in the Division 3 landscape. But when I look at the end of the year, their total context, I will primarily contextualize the Division 3 portion, since that will be 90% of their schedule anyway.
Sounds good. I like it. Yeah, I think where it gets more interesting is like what happens if it is an exhibition game for the D3 and it doesn't like officially count towards the record.
Because then you're doing stuff like you have to look how the game was played. Was the D1 playing it seriously? Was the D3 playing it seriously? Yada yada.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. All right, that wraps it up for the mailbag. If you have a mailbag item for us to address in the future, you can leave it as a message on this YouTube episode, and we will find it there in the comments. You can send it to us on social media. We're easy to find on X, on Facebook, and on Blue Sky. We'd love to hear from you and address what burning topics you have for us in a future episode. All right, before we get out of here, Matt, we've got a great group of supporters we need to thank, people who have decided to partner with us to financially support what we do with the show, putting this show on, keeping all the information online and up to date at d3datacast.com without putting it behind a paywall, without putting it behind and littered with a bunch of ads. So grateful for this group of people. A couple in particular to shout out this week, Matt, as new supporters at the Great Job Team tier. That's Jimmy Smith and Mark Hettinger. Thanks so much. Head to patreon.com/D3Datacast for more on how you can join these great people in supporting the D3 Datacast.
Thank you for all you do in supporting us and joining with us and creating this content. We have a lot of fun with it. We hope you love Division 3 basketball too. I'm sure you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't choose to do this. But I hope you enjoy these episodes. Zach, I had a lot of fun with you again this week. We're going to sign off and say, good job, team.
Good job, team.